and welcome to the Panthers show. We have a really special show with like 3 different mock drafts for you today. My name's Dylan Jackson. Today I'm joined by Jacob LeQuire. Jacob, how you doing?
It is mock draft Monday in the week of the NFL draft. I don't think I could be doing any better.
We're 3 days away, pretty much on the dot. We will be getting the Las Vegas Raiders at least being on the clock. I don't know if they'll have made their pick by this point, especially with how teams with that first overall pick love to milk the clock. But yeah, you said it. We have a 32 pick mock draft to discuss. We've already made the picks, but we're going to be discussing each and every single one of them. And then you and I both came to the table with a Panthers specific 7-round mock draft. So we'll digest those as well. Jacob, we have an entire Panthers centric draft guide. We have new features that we've added as soon as this past weekend with our specific Panthers targets in the first round. There's a lot in there. There's a roster breakdown. There's our guys specifically. You can generate a draft bingo card and obviously a top 100 player list as well. So if you have not already, please check that out over at sportclt.com. You can follow the show on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts at The Panther Show, as well as our Substack, which is, once again, sportclt.com. So, Jacob, we're going to go ahead and get into our 32-pick mock draft. You took the odds. I took the evens. So we'll start with the first pick, even though it's relatively self-explanatory. You had the Las Vegas Raiders with the first overall pick. Just to clarify, this mock draft was based off of what we think will happen, not necessarily what we would specifically do.
Yeah, and there was a trade in there over the weekend that might throw a wrench into things. But as far as the number one overall pick, Fernando Mendoza, he's been the pick since they won the national championship, since he won the Heisman back in December, I believe. I think he's worth the number one overall pick. He's certainly the best QB in this draft. Vegas has been setting themselves up to take a potential franchise QB, and Mendoza fits the bill, right? He's the size, he has an adequate arm, made clutch plays all year. I'm thinking about like the Penn State game where he threw the game winner with maybe 15 seconds left. Capable quarterback. I think they'll have to figure some stuff out with the offensive line maybe later in the draft, but really like Mendoza, and I think he will be a good fit there in Vegas, who added Kirk Cousins last month, so there's not a ton of pressure for Mendoza to be the guy immediately.
Yeah, if you listen to Kirk Cousins, his Vegas Raiders interview as soon as he signed, he all but confirmed that Las Vegas would be taking Fernando Mendoza with this first overall pick. It's a 1-quarterback class, unfortunately, for the New York Jets specifically, but I think we can kind of just move on to that second overall pick. We don't have to talk much about Mendoza. I had the Jets picking David Bailey here. You could really debate whether you think it's Arvell Reese, whether it's David Bailey. I think the Jets are going to prefer somebody with a little bit more college production, even if I personally view Arvell Reese as the better prospect. But high floor, pass rusher here with Bailey. He was ultra productive at Texas Tech this past year. What do you make of Bailey to the Jets?
I think it's good, and I do think it's down to these two players, right? Reese and Bailey. Bailey was incredibly productive this year. I think he was second in pressures behind Ruben Bain, but at like 100-something fewer pass rush snaps. So pretty high pressure percentage, really improved versus the run this season. At Stanford, he was basically a designated pass rusher. They would just take him off the field, but got a lot better. Was a big reason why that Texas Tech team went to the college football playoff. I think they were third ranked going into the playoff. Really good player. And I think you're right here that they will prefer someone with a bit more, let's say, experience at the edge position when they're taking somebody that high, even if Arvell Reese might have a slightly higher ceiling.
This is kind of a true coin flip. The odds have flipped back and forth between who's the favorite for the second overall pick. I think Schefter today said, or I think it was Todd McShay actually said that he's heard it's Arvell Reese. Ian Rappaport just an hour ago said he thinks it's David Bailey. So you could kind of put anybody you want here. I don't think it affects the rest of the draft that much. We'll get to kind of what I expect to happen with the other guy that's not taken by the New York Jets. But you had the third overall pick with the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I went with Francis Mauigoa here. To me, he's the best offensive lineman in this draft. I think he's really polished. Arizona doesn't necessarily need a left tackle since they took Paris Johnson a few years ago. I think they just accepted his fifth-year option earlier this week, if I'm not, or earlier today.
Good player.
Mauigoa, good player. Mauigoa, I think, is a seamless day one right tackle starter. He's a little bit smaller than you would like, but I think he moves well enough to compensate for that. And he's been a true freshman since day one, stepping onto campus at Miami. He's been battle tested and was a real reason why both Cam Ward and Carson Beck this year have had success and have had the right side of their offensive line protected. So, if I were someone, or if I had a stake in this, so to speak, I think I would put Malinois as the first offensive lineman drafted.
Do you think that Arizona will be aggressive in trying to trade down?
For sure, right? They're not a team that's one player away. It wouldn't surprise me if the board falls like this, if they take Arvell Reese, right?
Yeah.
They've been
Yeah.
known to go with some of the tweener defenders in the past, but I think if they're looking to fortify for the future QB, given that I think Jacoby Brissett is having a little bit of contract disputes, and their quarterbacks this year are Brissett and Gardner Minshew, kind of indicating that they want to get younger there quick. I think you got to go with the O line.
What do you make of the reports really strong early today, actually, about Jeremiah Love potentially being in contention for this number 3 overall pick?
I think it makes sense given where Love is in the class, right? I think he's the second best player on my board. He and Caleb Downs are the two blue chippers, I would say. But I think they just re-signed or extended James Conner during last season, and they moved some stuff. Didn't they sign Tyler Algier as
They
well
did.
in free agency? It would be a bit redundant to add a third, not a third, but another running back to that room. But Love is certainly better than both of those guys. So high upside. It's just the value part of it, right? Can you really rationalize taking a running back this early when that's probably one of the more solid positions on their roster?
Yeah, I think this conversation goes for both 3 and 4, Arizona and Tennessee, where taking a guy like Jeremiah Love, while undeniably exciting, while potentially helping out your young quarterback, maybe Arizona ends up with Simpson specifically for this conversation later in the draft. I think it seems like it would be putting the cart before the horse in a way, where running backs, I think, are more of an accelerant rather than a foundation piece of the offense. And Jeremiah Love is an amazing prospect. He's very, very good. But I think that taking him when you need more of a foundation, specifically on the offensive line for Arizona and Tennessee, I think that it would be kind of a misstep in their team building process. Though I do acknowledge that I think you agree. Jeremiah Love is a top 2. Many people have him as their number 1 overall prospect in this draft class. Like, I get the appeal with him, but again, Maui Noah to me makes a lot more sense. I like what you did with that pick, but I think that Jeremiah Love to Arizona specifically is a little bit of a head scratcher.
Well, we have a very, very recent case study on it last year with Ashton Genty, who I think
Yeah.
was the second player on my board last year. I think those two grade out of similar prospects, Genty and Love. And then Armand Membu, the right tackle, went one pick after to the New York Jets, who was incredible as a rookie. If it were up to me, he'd be getting rookie of the year votes, but they don't go to offensive linemen. And then Genty went to Vegas one pick before. That offense was just very, very bad, struggled a ton. Geno Smith did not play like he had in years past, and Genty couldn't really rectify that, and he couldn't get himself going because the pass game was so bad.
It's very similar to that situation. And I remember a lot of the conversation was don't overthink it. Genty's a good player. I think if Vegas had that pick over, they would take an offensive tackle with that pick. But let's move on. I had the 4th overall pick. And since I controlled the teams with even picks, I made a trade. You also made a trade later, I believe. I had the Dallas Cowboys trading up with the Tennessee Titans. So in this trade, I have the Dallas Cowboys giving up the 12th, 20th, and 92nd overall picks. and receiving pick number 4 and 35. So they move down from 20 to 35 and give up a third round pick to make this happen. In doing so, they select Arvell Reese, who, in my opinion, if you're going to take an edge rusher in the top 5 this year, he'd be the one to do it if you're not going to take Ruben Bain. If you have those kind of physical constraints, you have those measurement thresholds that you like. So Arvell Reese, to me, if you're going to take one, he has potentially the highest upside of not just any edge rusher in this class, but maybe any player in this class. He's a freaky athlete. He's super bendy. Ironically compares to Micah Parsons, which is really fitting for this trade specifically. But I do think Dallas is going to be one of the more aggressive teams on draft night. Maybe it's not for Reese. Maybe it's for a guy like Sonny Styles, for Caleb Downs. Maybe it's not for the 4th pick. It's for the 6th pick. But I do think that Dallas is going to be aggressive. And if Arvell Reese is sitting here at 4th overall, if it's not the Titans that take him, I think Dallas will be trading up.
It's the mystery box gif from Family Guy.
Right.
With they traded away Micah Parsons, but Arvell Reese could be anything. He could even be Micah Parsons. And it's funny that they would use 2 first-round picks, which was the price for Parsons, to go get a younger projected Parsons. But I think the fit is very good. Dallas has done really good, or they've done a great job at getting the interior of their defensive line fixed, right? So much so that they were able to trade away Osa Digizua, who they extended prior to the season. But they need those pass rushers now. Arvell Reese, whether you have him as a down linebacker or somebody who's standing up, is going to be incredibly explosive. I like the fit there because he doesn't have to be the number one lineman early, because they have guys like Quinnen Williams. And I think he's going to bring the juice to a Dallas defense that really let the offense down last year when Dak was healthy and when both of the receivers were on the field at the same time. It's kind of like the NFC version of the Bengals, where incredibly explosive offense, but defense would also allow 30 plus points a game.
And if the Cowboys stick at 12, I think they're getting a different tier of player
Oh, yeah.
versus Arvell Reese, right? You're looking more at maybe Caleb Downs falls, probably not. Maybe you're looking at a Dylan Thieneman at 12th overall. I don't think he is a player that's in the same tier as Arvell Reese. Maybe you're looking at Jermod McCoy or Mansour Delane, somebody like that. I just think if you have an opportunity with the draft capital that you do, Dallas is uniquely positioned to go up and make a trade like this for an Arvell Reese.
And the rumors have swirled that they're a team that wants to move up, right? So I think this would be somebody who makes sense.
Let's get to the 5th overall pick. You had the Giants selecting Ohio State linebacker Sonny Styles.
A lot of Ohio State early. It's a shame that they weren't able to win it all this year. But Sonny Styles, I think, was a huge piece of that defense. One of the better, just pure linebacker prospects in recent years. He actually started as a safety at Ohio State, but they added a guy named Caleb Downs who pushed Sonny Styles toward the linebacker spot, and I think he's really thrived there. Really good hitter. There's not a ton to say negative about his game. And for the Giants specifically, I think that there are 2 key positions that they could address on defense, maybe 3. And one of the positions they just traded away somebody, Dexter Lawrence. And I don't think that there are any defensive linemen, or especially along the interior, that are worth a top 10 pick or even a high first round pick in general in this year's class. But Sonny Styles is someone that I think can be transformative to a defense that already has good edge rushers, that already has a good front. And I think that he can play alongside the guy they added from the Bears, at Tremaine Edmonds, and they can be a good linebacker duo there with a good front in front of them. And the defense can take this team maybe to the next level as Jackson Dart continues to grow.
Yeah, Sonny Styles, again, I think he's clearly a top 5 prospect, regardless of position in this draft class. For me, he might be like number 1 if I really had to stack it. Very, very good prospect. He's, to me, like the ultimate John Harbaugh type of pick, right? Just establish the middle of the defense, the green dot guy. And I just think he fits really well here. Do you think that there's a conversation to be had about Jeremiah Love for the Giants specifically?
Absolutely. Who is their running back right now? And I wouldn't expect Cam Scadaboo to be ready to go this year. So are we looking at Tyrone
Tyrone
Tracy,
Tracy, I think.
who good fantasy player in weeks like 10 through 14 every year, but not really a difference maker in the NFL box score, so to speak. Jeremiah Love, incredibly explosive. The Giants, their ownership group has familiarity with taking running backs high, right? Saquon Barkley was the second overall pick in a class that included 5 first round quarterbacks. Like that was a very good class, and Saquon still went number 2. So wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. I think we're on Jeremiah Love watch as soon as the Jets get off the clock there too. They could even take him, but that would be a little bit rich, and they have a lot more needs. So I think 3 and down is where we'll be on Jeremiah Love watch on Thursday.
Yeah, it would be funny if it was like one of those teams that we weren't necessarily expecting to take him, like maybe the Jets, maybe the Browns, potentially, even
Yeah.
though they have a guy like Quinshon Judkins. He just feels like a guy who's going to go somewhere within that top 7. So I think it'll be 3 or 4 for Jeremiah Love, but we'll get to that conversation later. Let's get to the Cleveland Browns, who I made the pick for, and it was Carnell Tate, Ohio State wide receiver. There was a report today, I can't remember who it was from, that basically said Todd Monken was really high on a guy like Carnell Tate and what he would add to this Browns offense. I think if you're Cleveland, you have to walk away from this draft with a receiver and an offensive tackle. And to me, if you have a chance to get Carnell Tate, it makes sense to pair him with a tackle that you can get at 24 because there's so many quality guys that I think teams are going to be picking their flavor rather than picking, an ordered list off the board. Those tackles could go in any order. You could get somebody like Caden Proctor, who the Browns have been rumored to be interested in at 24 potentially. So I think if you're Cleveland, Carnell Tate makes a ton of sense. And I'd rather have Carnell Tate and one of those later tackles than maybe a Spencer Fano or a Caden Proctor or a Francis Maui Noah at number 6. And I don't know, Omar Cooper at 24, right? I just think that the order makes sense if you take a receiver first.
That and that Carnell Tate brings something that the Cleveland offense doesn't really have. It's somebody who can push the ball downfield. I think Harold Fannon's probably their most accomplished and reliable receiving option at this point. And he's not really a downfield. Well, Carnell Tate's not a burner, but he can get open downfield and secure the catch. Reliable hands and just super, super experienced this year at Ohio State. It would be hard for Cleveland to pass up the in-state talent there as well.
He's kind of the quarterback's best friend receiver, like a
Yeah.
really good outside the numbers, really good contested catch guy. Probably the best contested catch guy downfield in this draft class. I think to me, he's wide receiver 1. You could make a case for some other guys. I know a lot of people are really high on Jordan Tyson, but I think for Cleveland, Carnell Tate makes a ton of sense, and he's going to make things easier for that Cleveland offense.
The first thing I wrote in my notes when I watched Carnell Tate for the draft this year was sideline master because he just won outside the numbers so consistently. So I think that would be an excellent fit for Cleveland, who needs a lot of help.
At number 7, you had the Washington Commanders selecting Jeremiah Love. He finally comes off the board. This is an electric selection for you.
Yes, it's tough because Washington can go in a bunch of different directions, but their season last year really was hamstrung by injury. Whether it was Jaden Daniels, some of the offensive line issues there, you could look at maybe some of the corners right here, or maybe Caleb Downs, another Ohio State player, the safety. But I think the pair of Jaden Daniels and Jeremiah Love in the same backfield is just really electric. It's hard. It would be hard for defenses on different types of RPOs or zone reads to deal with both of them. And Jeremiah Love is a capable receiver as well. So it's really like a 3 or 4+1 for defenses to have to consider Jeremiah Love as a receiving option. And one of Jaden Daniels' strengths is when he's scrambling, he was really bad at this in college, but his rookie year, he was very good at scrambling to throw, kind of like what Mahomes does, different types of scramblers, but looking to get the pass no matter what. And I think Jeremiah Love's an excellent kind of leak out player for that. So it's hard to turn down that pairing. And ultimately, I think that's why Washington, if Love makes it this far, is going to have a really hard time not picking him there.
If Carnell Tate was available with this pick, does it change the calculation for you at all?
I'm going to say no. Not that they're not similar prospects. I think Love's 2 for me and Tate is he's 10 for me, so not too far there, but I think Washington is in a position where they need the best offensive player. Like their offensive line is established, they've made the trades and things like that. If they're going to go offense, I think it's highest graded weapon, and I think for a lot of teams, that's gonna be Jeremiah Love.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fit. It's really a really good one, and I think having a dynamic quarterback option helps Jeremiah Love succeed because there's always going to
Right.
be that threat of the read option. You see it with the Ravens, with Lamar Jackson and whoever plays running back, whether it's Derrick Henry, whether it's somebody else in that backfield. They always benefit from having a guy like Lamar Jackson handing them the ball just because of the threat of the read option. So I think it's a really it would be a home run pick, I think, for Washington. And I think the lone team in the top 10 where I'm like perfectly fine with them taking Jeremiah Love because for them, they're in the top 10. They have a roster that's made the NFC championship game. Yes, they're getting older. Yes, they could use this as maybe a foundation piece with this draft, maybe a receiver, maybe a defensive player, something like that. But for them to walk away with what some people consider the best overall player in this draft, I think it just makes them so much more dynamic on offense. And speaking of a player who is dynamic on offense, I have the Saints taking Jordan Tyson, Arizona State receiver. He is incredibly fun. A lot of people have him as their wide receiver one. The injuries really scare me. I think it's come out pretty recently. I would say since Friday, since his workout in front of NFL teams, that Tyson is a solid top 15 pick at the minimum, with the ability to go as high as maybe number 5 overall to New York. So I think New Orleans, they're in desperate need of additional receiving help. You have some injury history with Chris Olave previously, and Devon Vele isn't going to cut it. I don't even know who the other receivers are on this roster. I think you have an offensive minded head coach, a running back that you just paid a lot of money, a really solid offensive line. This is a chance to make your offense even more exciting.
You're not a big fan of Devon Vele and the was it the 4th rounder they
They gave
traded
up a
for him?
4th round pick for Devon Vele. And then they
Yeah.
said he was young, which he's on a rookie contract, but he's 28 years old.
Older than the quarterback there, I guess, Tyler Shuck. But it's easy to see why a lot of people have Jordan Tyson as wide receiver one. He's clearly the most talented receiver in this class to me. The issue lies with the injury history and how much risk a team is willing to tolerate, right? Because it's a completely torn up knee 1 year, collarbone the next year, and then a hamstring this past year. So not similar injuries, but injuries every year, similar uh, time frame, I suppose. And if you can get past that, and you look at what he did in this workout, like the clips are going on Twitter today of him just cutting effortlessly. Very good hands, catcher, another sideline winner. I wrote in my notes, good contact balance. Reminds me, it's so hard because Tedero McMillan was a bit. I think he was a lot more fluid, and he was bigger as well. But I think that Tyson similarly can move after the catch at a plus size, which a lot of the players in this or the receivers in this class cannot. It would be hard for a team to pass him up if they are sold on the medicals. Like if the medicals didn't exist, we're talking about Tyson going 6th overall instead of Carnell Tate, or
Maybe third.
maybe even higher, right? To was that Arizona's 3rd? So it's hard to pass up, but you really have to be willing to stomach the risk when it comes to an injury history as lengthy as that.
Let's get to the 9th overall pick. You had the Kansas City Chiefs selecting Ruben Bain.
I love Ruben Bain on the field. I think he's an excellent player. Can go inside out. The arm length doesn't really dissuade me because he's strong enough and has enough of a pass rush bag to get past that and to be able to do many different things to get to the quarterback. Really good run defender. We talked about how Fernando Mendoza was kind of unflappable when we were talking about the number 1 overall pick. The Miami defense made him not scared, but you could see Mendoza was struggling throughout that game just because Ruben Bain and that defensive line were putting on a show in the national championship. I think Kansas City really needs reinforcements at key premium positions. if Patrick Mahomes is going to come back this year, their so to speak, their premium spots, their good spots have to be in working order, right? They just drafted a left tackle last year. Travis Kelsey's coming back. Chris Jones is still there, but you really need a true edge rusher, and I don't think George Karlaftis has been that since they drafted him. He got extended, but I think he's a really good number two, and I think that Ruben Bain can be a team's number one.
When you look at the teams selecting edge rushers in the top 10 of this draft, it doesn't seem like Ruben Bain is in consideration for any of those picks up until number 9. Maybe Washington potentially, maybe New York, but these are teams that A, have established edge rushers already, and B, prefer length on the outside. Kansas City is a team that doesn't really have positional size constraints, right? They're a team that took Xavier Worthy. They're a team that's been more willing to take these outliers in terms of size, in terms of length. So to me, like, this is a slam dunk pick for the Kansas City Chiefs. They get a dynamic edge rusher who wins with power, is able to win with his skill, his speed. To me, like, if I had the second overall pick with the Jets, I'd take Ruben Bain. I think he's the best overall edge rusher in this class. I think he's got a higher floor than a guy like Arvell Reese, and I think he's got a higher ceiling than a guy like David Bailey. So to me, like, for the Kansas City Chiefs to luck out with Bain with the 9th overall pick, that's a home run. And I think this to me is a pick that I have made in, I think, every single one of my mock drafts, and will probably continue to do so up until Thursday night. So until this pick is not Ruben Bain, I'm just going to continue to believe that it is.
He's my number 3 overall player, number 1 edge rusher, similar to you here, and it would just be another good player that falls to Kansas City, maybe due to like length or something. Or Josh Simmons last year, it was some of his medicals caused him to fall, but really good player when he's on the field. They need to rebuild just based on missing the playoffs last year, and I think Bain is a huge step in that direction. And I think that his range really is here from, I would have said 8 to 10 before the trade we'll talk about in a second. I think New Orleans could use a guy like this, but taking an offensive player, I think, to help evaluate Tyler Shuck is the direction they're going to go in.
So the reason I don't think New Orleans takes Bain is because Mickey Loomis historically has always taken longer edge rushers, right? I
Yeah.
think that they might be a team, if David Bailey makes it to number 3, could trade up to that Arizona Cardinals pick. Maybe they just use their second round pick to move up. But I think the Saints really prefer having lengthier edge rushers, right? They traded a first round pick to move up for Marcus Davenport, if you remember
Yeah.
that. So they're just a team that I don't think is going to take Bain because of those size constraints. To me, though, for Kansas City, it's, an amazing value for where you're getting. And to get Ruben Bain in the 1 year that you have a top 10 pick with Pat Mahomes and this entire Chiefs dynasty, you could call it, that's a amazing value for them. So with the 10th overall pick, we originally had the Cincinnati Bengals making this pick. So when we had Caleb Downs here, it was to the Cincinnati Bengals. We made this mock draft on Friday in preparation for this podcast, but with it being New York, I think that's a pick that we would have made either way for this team. I had this pick. Caleb Downs makes sense to the New York Giants. I honestly think that if Caleb Downs is gone by this point, I think the Giants might consider Dylan Thieneman with this 10th overall pick. I just think that they're going to want to walk away with a cornerstone on defense. And Caleb Downs is, I know he's your number 1 player. He's probably a top 2 player for me. If you ignore position, he's been doing it for years. He stepped on the field at Alabama and was immediately one of the best defensive backs in college football as an 18-year-old freshman. He eats, sleeps, and breathes football. I think the Giants, while they lose Dexter Lawrence with this pick, they're bringing in a bona fide star. I think they're getting as close to you can get as a guaranteed All-Pro with Caleb Downs.
I think he is, outside of maybe not being 6'2" and a little bit heavier, I think he's the perfect safety prospect, maybe in the last 10, maybe ever. And I know a lot of people will point to the size point, but guys like he's the same size as guys like Ed Reed and Troy Polamalu and Brian Dawkins. Some of the greatest safeties ever weren't these like 6'2", 6'3" presences in the backfield. And I really like this pick because you're pairing him with Sonny Styles, somebody that he played behind at Ohio State this year. Caleb Downs, and I heard it on another podcast. I think it was the Mina Kimes show and I think Dominique Foxworth was the guest there, and they were talking about how boring his tape is and how it kind of detracts from his value. But when you realize that it's boring because he doesn't have errors in his game and it doesn't make mistakes, it all clicks that, oh, he's the one setting up. He was their green dot, setting up their defense for the most part, communicating before, during, and after plays, has played for 3 different defensive coordinators. At Alabama, he was more of a free safety. He was able to rotate closer to the box at Ohio State. And like you said, since the moment he stepped on campus at Tuscaloosa, probably the best defensive back in college and has been one of Nick Saban's most talented players. He was there for Saban's last season. One of Nick Saban's most talented players who has one of the best galleries of players he's ever coached, right? So I think when you're able to add somebody of this caliber as a finishing piece to a defense where you're adding Sonny Styles or you already have Abdul Carter, Brian Burns as your second rusher, I really like that for a defense that is kind of putting it back together, even though they lost one of the best nose tackles in the game just a couple of days ago.
So they had Sonny Styles with the 5th overall pick. They had Caleb Downs with the 10th overall pick. Would you say that's about as good as a haul as you can get in this draft?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless they get another top 10 pick and throw Jeremiah Love in there.
Yeah, that probably won't happen. But
probably not.
Let's get on to Miami. You had this pick, 11th overall, Keldrick Falk. I don't think many people are mocking Keldrick Falk in the top 15, but he's somebody that I think we both agree is going to go much earlier than expected.
For sure. A lot of people, ourselves included, all we have is the tape, right? And we can see that even though he's this like hulking person, he's like 6'6", almost 280 pounds, lining up at 4i when really he should be more of a regular edge rusher, making plays in the run game. Not a ton of sack production for Auburn this past season, but impacts the plays when he's out there really fast. Like he's able to chase ball carriers and QBs down. Might not result in a sack, but he's able to get after them. And he's also the youngest player in this draft class. He's going to be 21 this season while he plays, kind of similar to Nick Scorton last year. And some of the reporting throughout the cycle is that he's one of the best leaders or locker room people in the entire draft class. I was like, we don't know stuff about that because we don't go talk to teams and scouts, but from all accounts, he's been one of the highest character players as well. And the reason I gave him to Miami here is we got to think about who Miami's new structure is. They have their GM, John Eric Sullivan, comes from Green Bay, and Green Bay's always been a traitsy first-round destination. If you remember, a couple years ago, they took Lucas Van Ness in the first round. And I would say that these two are in a similar tier as far as prospects or how their grade turns out. But I think for a GM that's trying to put together a brand new team, he's going to want to get someone with blue chip traits, blue chip like type of person, culture guy for someone who turns around the team. And I think that when you have a runway this wide for Keldrick Falk, who again is 21 years or is going to be 21 years old this season, you could be looking at someone who is almost like a Trayvon Walker by year 3 or year 4, which people think back, it's like that was a bad first overall pick because Aiden Hutchinson went next. But he's a quiet 10-plus sack guy every year, really good run defender guy. And I think that's what you envision when you look at Falk.
Yeah, he's a very good player. I think Keldrick Falk specifically, I think he'll walk into the NFL as one of the better edge setting defensive ends, right? And you look at that Miami defensive end room and their defensive line specifically, they're missing that body type. It's a bunch of NASCAR package players on that edge room. They have Chop Robinson. They have some other guys in there. Keldrick Falk would add a body type that they don't already have. And that's something that teams think about constantly. Keldrick Falk, I think he only had 2 sacks last year, but there's some real athletic potential. They didn't really let him get after the quarterback in the ways that you would want at Auburn last year. You could say the same thing about his running mate, Kyron Crawford at Auburn, but I think for Miami, there's a trend of these newer front offices who get instilled with these ultimate team teardowns where they have basically nothing on the roster. They almost always prioritize trench play. And Keldrick Falk is, I think, just a glue guy. He's going to be a solid role player for you with some upside to become much, much more than that.
And scheme wise, their new head coach Jeff Hafley comes from Green Bay, and they've been running an even front for quite some time with players of this size and mold. So I think he'll be an immediate Jeff Hafley guy if this were the selection.
Yeah. For the Tennessee Titans, I had Makai Lemon. So they traded down with this pick. They acquired number 20 and number 92 to move down from 4 to 12. They also give up pick 35 in that deal. The Titans have a lot of holes to fill. They addressed the receiver position with Wan'Dale Robinson. You could worry about some overlapping skill set, but they still need a primary target. And I think Makai Lemon is somebody that could fill that void. I don't think that he's a slot only guy. I think that he's maybe a slot mostly guy, but to me, he's a good fit with what Brian Daboll is going to want. Maybe you prefer an outside receiver here. Unfortunately, Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson are both gone. But Makai Lemon, I think, could fill in as like a 120 target player as a rookie. And I think he'll just fill up the stat sheet pretty immediately as a rookie, which means a lot for a Titans team that was completely devoid of any sort of receiving talent. I like Lemon for them more than I like Jeremiah Love, where you are still looking to fill out some of the offensive infrastructure a bit. I actually think that Tony Pollard is completely fine at running back for them if you have to rely on him in, I think, the third year of his contract now. But I think you have to surround Cam Ward with more weapons. I think that's going to be the best way to maximize his 2026 season. To me, if you have a chance to get Makai Lemon at 12th overall, it makes a lot of sense. And I think something they are going to consider doing if they move back.
I think Lemon's range starts one pick before with Miami there. I think he would fit in well in Miami as well. It's so interesting, right? I just pulled up Wan'Dale Robinson's stat sheet from this past season. 140 targets, 92 receptions, and of course he had just over 1,000 yards there. It would be so interesting to have these two here because in your mind you're thinking, oh, they're similar body types, right? But Makai Lemon is bigger, stronger, probably a little bit juicier as well
Yeah.
compared to Wan'Dale Robinson, who's like 5'7" or something like that. We think of Lemon as a small guy, but 5'11" and maybe 10 more pounds is quite a bit in the NFL. And I think that for Cam Ward, his downfield options this past year were Calvin Ridley, who was injured, oft injured, and when he was on the field, not super reliable. His hands weren't there this year. Ilik Iomanor, who also not super reliable, and Chimere DK, who excellent returner,
Pro
not necessarily
Bowler.
Pro Bowler. I think he set the rookie scrimmage yards record. So very, very good player. Not necessarily a true receiver like Kayvonte Turpin in Dallas. Not necessarily a true wide receiver. So when you're able to add somebody like Lemon, who I think runs incredibly sharp routes, I think is very good at the catch point. Probably I think we talked about this earlier. Maybe best pound for pound receiver at the catch point in this year's class. Maybe limited in terms of yak and explosive ability, but I think you just need a reliable pass catcher for Cam Ward. And the two things that Lemon will do are get open, especially on third downs, and catch the ball. So if you're going to look to evaluate Ward, I think Lemon's a very good step for the team this season.
Yeah, I could see them going Keldrick Falk here too if he's available. If they make a trade like this, I think Keldrick Falk is a very much a Robert Saleh type of defensive end, but they still have the 20th pick. I'm going to spoil that it is going to be a defensive end whenever we get there, but let's move on to 13 overall. You had the LA Rams.
I have no idea what to make of this pick. The Rams could go in a number of directions. I think they'd like for a guy like Jordan Tyson or Makai Lemon to make it to them at 13. And in this exercise, he didn't make it there. I guess that going offensive line and bolstering that in the wane years of Matthew Stafford is a good direction to go. I know that their interior has been really good. Their tackles, I'm not super sold on. Like Warren McClendon, I think he was reliable, but isn't going to dissuade me from adding somebody of Spencer Fano's caliber to that right side. That's the pick here from Utah, Spencer Fano, a guy that I'm a bit lower on, but I know a lot of evaluators trust that he can be an effective tackle in the NFL, and if not, can be a very good interior presence as well. The Rams have had some issues with their offensive linemen staying healthy into the like in training camp and into the season over the past couple of seasons. So I think that adding someone like Fano that can play maybe swing tackle early and reinforce the depth and eventually become a starter at right tackle or maybe right guard. I think that's a good way to go when you are basically playing with house money with this pick, because this pick comes to LA from Atlanta in last year's deal.
Yeah, they've already added Trent McDuffie with the 29th overall pick. They've already addressed the secondary in a big way. I think it was, again, Todd McShay mentioning that Dylan Thieneman was a possibility for this 13th overall pick. I said on maybe it was the last episode or the one before that, where I thought that taking Dylan Thieneman at 19 for Carolina specifically might be a reach. I'm kind of reversing course on that in the way that I'm not sure that he's going to be available. I think his range starts at number 10 overall to the New York Giants, depending on whether Caleb Downs has already been taken. And I think you could go at a variety of those picks, whether it's Dallas, Miami with those two picks, whether it's with LA here potentially. So I think there's a lot of potential for Dylan Thieneman to go pretty early in this draft class. If you look at a lot of the reporting, many of these insiders are saying that teams have between 12 and 14 or 15 first round grades on players. If Thieneman is one of them, which presumably he is because he is one of the better players, regardless of position in this draft class, do we think that he makes it to 19? I'm not sure. But you have Fano here. I think it makes a lot of sense. The Rams need tackle specifically. I think that they got pretty lucky with the way that McClendon worked out at right tackle this past year, but I'm not sure that that's somebody that you can really rely on moving into the future. Fano is, I think, going to have potentially 5 position versatility in the same way that Graham Barton did coming out of Duke. So that's really appealing to a lot of teams. I think that LA, they have a tendency to take those bigger tackles. So this would be a step in the other direction for them. But they also just tend to get the best players in the building and have it work out as well. A lot of people like mocking receivers here, whether it's Makai Lemon, whether it's Jordan Tyson. And that makes sense because the leaks that we've gotten over the past 2 years is that McVay wanted Brock Bowers and McVay wanted Tyrone McMillan. So neither of those happened, and they have an opportunity here, uniquely positioned at 13 overall, to get a pass catcher like that. But I just think it makes so much sense to take a tackle when you know that need is coming up, and picking so late in the first round usually means you can't get a player like Spencer Fano.
I thought about, to your point about McVay wanting a weapon, I thought about Kenyon Sadiq here as
Yeah.
well, but they didn't trade up. I think it was part of the trade back last year. They took the guy who was starting over him 2 years ago in Terrence Ferguson, and I don't know if they'd want to go Oregon tight end with their first pick of the draft that early, or their first pick of 2 consecutive drafts again. So I think tackle or offensive line in general is a good look for LA.
I had the 14th overall pick. This was the Baltimore Ravens. I mentioned that Ruben Bain was a pick that I usually stamp in my mock drafts. It's one that I don't really think much about because it makes too much sense. This is another one, right, with Ayane, who is just I think very clearly the best guard prospect in this draft class. The Ravens have some holes along their offensive line, especially along the interior after losing Tyler Linderbaum. Ione is a player that I think is just a plug and play lineman, moves well, has solid anchor for his size, and I think is just an immediate starter for a Baltimore Ravens team that desperately needs O-line starters.
Yeah, this one's pretty chalky. I don't know if I've seen a mock draft that doesn't have Vega Ioane going 14th overall to Baltimore, and it makes sense, right? They plug and play guard. He could probably play both guard spots if they need him to, but
Yeah.
at the same time, like that's how good of a player he is. But I think there are center questions with Linderbaum getting just that massive deal that he got in free agency. But there's not too much more to say about Baltimore, who they still want to be a run centric team with Lamar and Derrick Henry. And Ioane, one of his big strengths is moving people in the run game. So plug and play type of player there.
15th overall, you had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
This is an interesting one because, like the Rams, I don't really know the direction that Tampa Bay would want to go. You figure that they are trying to get back in the NFC South run after narrowly missing it to the Carolina Panthers last year. And for that, I think you would want plug and play players. And I know Jason Light doesn't really care about not red flags, but different holes in players' games. And I think Akeem Mesidor, while I'm not super high on him, and I know a lot of people aren't, he's probably the most ready pass rusher outside of Bailey and Bain in this class to immediately come in and give you some juice. And that's the position that I think Tampa Bay needs the most, is some juice from the pass rusher. I think he'd be a plug and play, probably starter for them this season. And the ceiling isn't there, right? Because he's a sixth year senior in college and because he'll be older by the end of his rookie deal. But if Tampa Bay is looking to continue, or rather get back their streak of winning the NFC South, I think they kind of need plug and play starters.
This is a front office and coaching staff that I think is going to have some urgency going into the 2026 season as well, right? They lose the division. Their fans are incredibly unhappy in doing so. It was an amazing collapse on that
Oh,
team's
yeah.
part where they just kept. I mean, they lost basically every game except that season finale against Carolina, which ended up not even mattering. So Mesidor, I think, provides. I think he'd immediately be their best edge rusher, pass rushing edge rusher, I should say. 25 years old. He to me is not somebody that I'm gonna take in the mid first round, but the NFL seems to like him. If there's no like true first round grades left on the board at this point for Tampa, I think they could take him and have an immediate kind of impact player in the edge room, almost like Byron Young for the Los Angeles Rams a few years ago.
That was a third round pick, I think, or maybe
It
second
was.
round pick. And that's just the difference in classes, right? That this class doesn't have all the flawless prospects. So once you get to around this point, you're gonna have holes in players' games that you're just gonna have to deal with, I think, if you are teams making these picks.
So I had the Jets at 16 overall. This trade happened. It was the Sauce Gardner trade, actually. I have them selecting Denzel Boston. So Denzel Boston, to me, is a player that I think is going to go much higher than people expect. There's some rumblings that it could be to the Jets at 16 here. I think this pick, regardless of who it will actually be, will be a receiver, whether it's Omar Cooper, whether it's Casey Concepcion, whether it's Makai Lemon. I think the Jets are going to be committed to adding to that receiver room. If you look outside of Garrett Wilson, it's bad. It's really bad. Like it's A.D. Mitchell. It was John Mechie last year for a period of time. Like this Jets receiving room is just horrendous. And I think Denzel Boston provides a skill set that I think NFL teams value, that big outside threat that can, haul in red zone touchdowns, who can win towards the sideline. I just think he's a player that NFL teams will covet. Even if the ceiling's a little bit capped on him, I could see him being a like multi-time 1,000-yard, maybe 7 or 8 touchdown type of player. And if you're getting that at 16, That's, I guess, in today's NFL, a $30 million player. So that's a good pick if you're the Jets at 16.
My rebuttal to that would be they can't even get Garrett Wilson to 500 yards. All right, so I think it's going to be a struggle to get Denzel Boston to 1,000, but it's this. It's easy to see why people like him or why teams will like him. He's big, strong, and fast, and he has caught contested catches at the college level. I've been burned on a lot of receivers that are like this. It's a little bit of helmet scouting, but I think Jalen Polk was kind of similar in his final season in Washington for the Washington Huskies. So I'm a little bit lower on Boston than the 16th pick, but at this point in the draft, there aren't a lot of X receivers left, right? There weren't a lot of X receivers going before this pick either. Boston kind of stands alone as the physical, imposing guy on the sideline. So if that's the archetype that a team needs, you're going to have to go Denzel Boston early because he's the only one until you get much later in the draft. I'm just trying to think about Chris Bell is similar, but I don't think he's quite as big or as explosive at the catch point. So it's going to be a while till you get this type of player later in the draft.
17th overall pick, you had the Detroit Lions selecting Caden Proctor.
This is an odd one because Caden Proctor is someone we've talked about. We don't believe in him as much as NFL teams seem to believe in him or are reported to believe in reaching the potential of Caden Proctor, right? You mentioned that, or at some point in the process, he was being talked about at 6th overall to the Cleveland Browns. That's a little bit rich for me, but I think that once we're in the offensive line, maybe swing or run here between the Rams going through Carolina all the way down to maybe the Texans, I think you're going to see a lot of teams picking the flavor of tackle that they like. And Caden Proctor, while there are some concerns about the weight, there are concerns, about consistency. He has the measurables, and the Lions like the measurables type of players. If they can get Proctor, maybe play him on the right because I think they're moving Penei Sewell to the left this year, which would be a bit counterproductive if they add a left tackle in the draft. But I think that if they're able to extract the value out of Caden Proctor, and they've been good at getting stuff out of their offensive linemen, Tate Ratledge, who was I think their second rounder this past year, took him a little bit, but he ended the year on a pretty high note. I think if they can get something out of Proctor and help him reach his ceiling, he blows away every tackle in this class just by virtue of him being 6'7", 350-ish plus, and being incredibly explosive with his feet. So it would be a kind of high risk, high reward type of play. But I think Detroit is able to make that type of play based on their track record.
Yeah, massive, heavy tackle with a huge frame. I think that he's got a ton of potential. I see him more as a guard almost, right? Where you kick him inside, you don't have to worry about a lot of the movement flaws that Caden Proctor has. But I think that, if you're Detroit at 17, it very much feels like a Brad Holmes, like take a big, strong tackle type of pick. They're also not afraid to go against consensus. They've done it in basically every single draft that they've had. They traded like 2 or 3 third-round picks for Isaac Tesla. They took Tyleik Williams in the first round last year, who I think most people had him going in like the early to mid second round. Obviously, you talk about the 2023 draft where they took both Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell in the first round against consensus. So I think that they're not a team that's afraid to stick to their board. And if it's Caden Proctor, then I'm willing to see what it looks like in Detroit, even if I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I'm skeptical as well, but if it works out, it's going to work out in a big way. And like you mentioned, Brad Holmes, not afraid to go against the grain, right? Everybody criticized him for the Jahmyr Gibbs draft, where it was running back, linebacker, tight end, safety with the first 4 picks, and they worked out pretty well. And 2 of those guys were Alabama guys. He likes some Alabama players.
So I had the Minnesota Vikings, 18th overall. At this point, it's kind of a dramatic fall for Mansour Delane, who I think a lot of people consider a potential top 10, maybe even higher than that pick in the draft. If you're the Minnesota Vikings, you have very specific needs. They could take a tight end. They could take a safety. Maybe this is the Dylan Thieneman spot. But for them to have an opportunity to select Mansour Delane at 18th overall, I just think it's an opportunity that they can't pass on. The stickiest cover guy, I think, in the draft this year. Maybe not an overwhelming athlete, not an explosive athlete by any means, but I think he's got adequate athleticism and certainly CB1 potential for whoever takes him.
It's between him and Jermod McCoy, and I think Delane's medicals clear out much, much better than McCoy's over the process. Really good player, can play both man and zone at a high level. Was pretty sticky this year for LSU. I know that Florida had their lumps this year, but that Florida game, he was all over the field. That game, LSU had 5 interceptions against the Gators in that one, and Delane was a big part of that one. He also has the size that you would want for a prototypical outside corner. So I think he's a plug and play guy, especially in a system with Brian Flores, who creates so much havoc up front with his front seven. It makes the corners' lives a lot easier. I don't want to downplay Isaiah Rodgers, who was incredible this year for Minnesota, especially with the takeaways and stuff like that. But if you're able to upgrade someone, maybe physically, maybe a bit better of a mover, and have that be your outstanding corner or corner two next to Byron Murphy, I think you're looking at a much upgraded defense for a team that sneakily, and this line right here, if you're watching live between 18 and 19, that's the division between the non-playoff teams and the playoff teams. They had a higher record than the team picking next, the Panthers, right? They just lucked out or had bad luck because Carolina was in a division that won it with 8 and 9, and they couldn't find a wild card at 9 and 8. So Minnesota, even with their quarterback woes, were good enough last year. I think getting a corner or someone this late like Delane, who top 10 to 12 player for most people, is almost a steal.
Let's get to the Panthers with this 19th overall pick. I think it's probably the moment that a lot of people watching us have been waiting for. What do you make of Monroe Freeling? Obviously, you picked him for Carolina here. I'm very high on him. Charleston native, hometown guy for me specifically. But what do you make of this pick?
It might be a bit disappointing to people watching wanting a weapon, or maybe Dylan Thieneman, who's still on the board in this exercise. But Adam Schefter reported it today, and I've kind of been in line since free agency that Schefter says he thinks that Carolina's pick is a trenches pick in this class, either offense or defense. I really don't think that there are interior defensive guys worth the 19th pick. And at this point, I don't think there's any edge rusher worth it either. And so when you flip it to the offensive side of the ball, this is a team that has the most expensive offensive line in the entire NFL this year, has had contributions. Or Damian Lewis, I'll say, played extremely well last year, but Robert Hunt missed a big chunk of last year. Taylor Moton has finally started to miss games. And Ike Ekwonu, though he looked really good walking in the latest post that Panthers social media put out, it's questionable if he's going to play at the start of the year, if at all, with the patellar tendon rupture. Even if Rasheed Walker is your day one left starter, even if he starts the majority of the season, I still think getting a guy like Freeling, who's an incredible mover for his size, is 6'7", just under 320 pounds, really came on down the stretch for Georgia last year. Like those last 3 games going into the SEC championship and their playoff game looked incredible. Looked like he had kind of figured it out from a tackle standpoint. I think getting someone there who not only is cheaper than the majority of your starters, but can step up this year and beyond as a potential long-term starter, I think that's the investment that Carolina needs to make, as opposed to maybe drafting a receiver for the 3rd time in 3 years, or adding to a defense where they are already spent an exorbitant amount in free agency. Left, like, franchise tackles just don't grow on trees, and if you're gonna get one, you kind of have to do it in the 1st round. And with the remaining players left, I think Freeling has the best chance of being a long-term left tackle, or could move to the right side and be the replacement to Taylor Moton in the future.
So you, me, and our friends over at Sports CLT, Steve and Akil, we made top 10 rankings for just our favorite targets in the 1st round for Carolina. There was an exclusion list, so we couldn't include guys like Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs or players that weren't feasibly going to be available when the Panthers picked. And at top of the list, consensus for all of us was, I say, let me rephrase that. The average ranking between the four of us had Monroe Freeling at number one. His average rank was 2 across all 4 of our boards, and he's just a player that I think works really well with what this team is trying to build. Rasheed Walker, I'm just not super convinced that the Panthers see him as a full year starter. And with Ike Ekwonu, I think taking Monroe Freeling doesn't exclude Ike Ekwonu from being a long-term tackle or just player in general for the Panthers. I think specifically you could move him to guard if you really see fit. Maybe you move off of Robert Hunt after this coming year, but we have to assume that Ike Ekwonu is going to miss the entirety of 2026. It was a really bad injury that he sustained late in the season in a playoff game, nonetheless. And it's unfortunate, but I think that it's a really responsible pick for Carolina and one that has a lot of upside, too. You mentioned the athleticism that Freeling has. He's the best mover at tackle among any tackle in this draft class. Super agile guy. He's, I think, a 10.0 RAS athlete, which is unbelievable. And he improved throughout the season at Georgia. Like, he was, by the end of it, just playing at a super elite level. There's an argument to be made that he's worth the 3rd overall pick in this draft class, depending on how you view Monroe Freeling.
Yeah, I'm there as well. As if anyone was watching, my mic stand just decided to break, so going old fashioned and holding it here. Hopefully, it still sounds good. But I think he's the number one left tackle in this class, right? And I know we have Caden Proctor going ahead of him here, and I think that's a traits based pick. But I think for someone day one that could come in and start, Freeling is going to give you a ton at that left tackle position, which I know right tackle's catching up, but across the league, left tackle is still the offensive line position that commands the most in terms of contracts, draft resources, that kind of thing. So it may not be the sexy pick or the fun pick that people want, but I think it is the responsible pick. And I think Dan Morgan has done the responsible thing over the past 2+ years that he's been in charge.
What do you think the short list will be? If you had, let's just say 3 players at 19 overall, what do you think the short list in this scenario would be?
So in this one, I think we still have Thieneman available. I think it's going to be Dylan Thieneman, Freeling, who I made the pick here, and Casey Concepcion. I think in Joe Person, who writes for The Athletic, he covers the Panthers. I think in one of his recent Q&As that he talked about the short list for the Panthers being maybe a local receiver like Casey Concepcion, who played high school football in Charlotte. I think Dylan Thieneman has been a huge riser over the past weekend plus for Carolina. And I think Freeling is the most established left tackle guy. So I would say those 3. And then maybe Kenyon Sadiq is thrown in there as well because he's been talked about throughout the process to Carolina.
One quick thing on Kenyon Sadiq before we move on, and we'll move relatively quickly because I want to get to the Panther specific mock drafts later in this episode. But one more quick thing on Sadiq. I'm not convinced that the Panthers are going to take a tight end in the first round because they've done so much work on the day 2 guys in this class, right? They brought in Oscar Delp for a visit. They brought in, I can't remember if they brought him in or they had some sort of visit with Max Clare. Eli Stowers has been pretty heavily linked to Carolina as well.
Justin Jolie had a local because he's NC State.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a ton of guys that are projected to go from rounds 2 to 4 that the Panthers have done work on. And that might just be due diligence, but I really do think that they view tight end maybe as stronger on day 2. And they can get a better combination of players by waiting at that position, kind of similar to what they did last year, where, you're going to get a better receiver at 8 than you are at, mid day 2. And that's kind of what their strategy was last year when they took McMillan and waited on edge rusher. I think they're very good at evaluating those types of possibilities. So I think if it's going to be a tight end, I really do think it's going to be day 2, even though Kenyon Sadiq is the guy in 40% of mock drafts right now for Carolina, if not more than that. So that's kind of my last Panthers thought. But let's move on to the Tennessee Titans at 20, who acquired this pick in this mock draft by moving down from 4 to 12 with the Dallas Cowboys. And I have them taking a player that I view as like just a super Robert Saleh edge rusher, and that's Malachi Lawrence, who has been climbing up draft boards. I think he's going to be a player that goes higher than maybe people think. A lot of people have him in the 30s and the 40s of mock drafts. I think there's a real shot that his range starts at 20 with Dallas or whoever owns this draft pick. And he's a very twitched up player. I think there's a potential that he's going to be a 3-down type of guy. I like him a lot more than the other edge rushers that could potentially go in this range, like TJ Parker, like Cassius Howell, like R. Mason Thomas potentially. I think Lawrence is the most well-rounded of any of those guys.
I would agree there. Femi Oladejo last year, late riser in the process, edge rusher from UCLA, ends up going day 2 to the Tennessee Titans. And obviously different coaching staff and stuff like that. But I think that they're a big fan of the late riser. And I think you make a good point. Lawrence is the most complete edge rusher defensive end at this point in the draft. I think Zion Young has another chance as well, but he's more of a first 2 downs run stop guy with an incredible motor who's still figuring out the pass rush there. But I could certainly see it. Lawrence is the prototypical size as well you would want from a 4-down front, which is what Saleh has run in the past.
All right, let's get to the next set of 4 picks. You had 21 with Pittsburgh.
This is where Omar Cooper's range, I think, starts, maybe with Carolina at 19, but I think this is really where the Omar Cooper sweepstakes are to be held. And I know that they added DK Metcalf last year, but I think Cooper brings a different yak ability, number one, to DK Metcalf in terms of running away from receivers as opposed to running over them. And I think he does a good job of getting open over the intermediate area. And if Rodgers is the quarterback next year, and I think everything's pointing to him maybe running it back 1 year with McCarthy, the coach he used to have in Green Bay, I think this would be an excellent addition and kind of a safety valve plus type of player that can take the things that Rodgers likes to do, a lot of the play action looks, and get 8 to 10 more yards each time, as opposed to, like we saw it down the stretch last year. Pittsburgh, they did make the playoffs, but they could have run away with the division had DK not gotten suspended and Rodgers had to rely on, I can't even remember who he was throwing to in that Cleveland game. Was
Austin?
Yeah, was MVS on that team?
Might have been.
Out of Scanlon. Yeah. I don't. He was throwing to some receivers during that Cleveland Browns game, and if he had a reliable go-to option like Omar Cooper, maybe they don't lose to Cleveland in that late season bout.
It's going to be a real shame when the Steelers have DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, and potentially Omar Cooper, and they still run screens on 40% of their passing plays. At least that's if Aaron Rodgers is back. This might be Ty Simpson. You never know. But I love the fit of Omar Cooper as a long-term receiving option in this receiving core. I just feel like the Steelers aren't going to be they're not going to want to be in a spot where receiver is a problem for them. I could see this pick being a tackle as well. Maybe they move Broderick Jones to the inside. He struggled quite a bit. I think there might be like some injury stuff with him this offseason too. But Omar Cooper, I think, like, if you're getting him at 21, that's good. You said his range starts at 19. I think his range starts at 16 to the New York Jets. I think they could potentially take him in the mid-first round. So all in all, I'm a big fan of the pick. 22, LA Chargers. I had Kenyon Sadiq slide ending here. The Oregon tight end, super electric player, ran a 4.39 40-yard dash at the combine. That's ridiculous. It's insane. He's a little bit undersized for a tight end. Like, he's on the shorter side. He's a little bit lighter, but I don't think that translates to his blocking. Like, I think I'm actually pretty consistently impressed by his effort and technique, even if there is improvements to be made in that area of his game. And while he wasn't the most productive throughout college, I still think that there's flashes and there's moments that really are going to excite a guy like Jim Harbaugh, who really values the tight end position. When he first started in Los Angeles, they paid, I can't remember who it was. I think it was Will Dissly was their biggest free agency addition that year. But Kenyon Sadiq is just a supercharged version of whoever's in that room right now.
And he's a different type of tight end than Oronde Gadsden, right?
Yeah.
He's a wide receiver convert when he was at Syracuse. That's where he started, but different type of player. He blocks. He reminds me of Colston Loveland in Michigan blocking. The technique isn't all the way there, but he's so powerful and strong enough just to overwhelm the second level defender or help seal off the edge on a combo against a defensive end. So I think he can fit well in 12 personnel, and I think that the Chargers are going to run heavier stuff, given that they drafted Amarian Hampton early last year. And if that's any indication about positional value, or if Harbaugh or Joe Ortiz cares about it, they obviously don't. They took a running back in the first round last year, so I think Sadiq would be an excellent fit for that team.
You are on the clock with Arizona. You made a trade here. I'll let you kind of explain the trade here that you made for the Cardinals, taking Philadelphia's pick at 23.
So I cheated a little bit. I took one even number pick and added it to this trade. The Cardinals have the 34th pick, so I took 34 and 65, which is the first pick in the third round. Use that to move up to pick 23 here. Philly's also given up pick 197, which I think balances out on the tree chart. But I think this is where Arizona moves up to take Ty Simpson, the quarterback out of Alabama. There's been a ton of rumbling over the last 2.5 weeks or so about Ty Simpson's eventual draft spot, and it's all been Arizona, right? Whether it's in the second round or beyond, or even before that. Simpson's a historical. I don't want to say historical because Bryce Young went first overall, but size-wise, Simpson is a pretty big outlier when you consider his size and his reps, or his amount of reps. Bryce Young at least was the Heisman winner and started 30 plus games, right? Ty Simpson has 15 starts in his college career. That historically has not gone well for first rounders. It brings up names like Anthony Richardson, Mitchell Trubisky, and both of those guys went second and third overall, but they were also prototypical quarterback sized. Simpson isn't quite there, but he is far and away QB2 in this class, and in a quarterback class that might be, it is a one horse race at the top, but there might be a race for quarterback 2. I think Arizona jumping ahead of Cleveland, who is maybe the other feasible quarterback team in the first round. I know they spent so much on quarterback last year, but we still don't know if Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, or Deshaun Watson. We know Deshaun Watson is not a long-term quarterback there, even though people are saying he might start. I don't know if we know about Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, excuse me, and they are products of the last coach, Kevin Stefanski. They have a new coach in there, Todd Monken, who's familiar with the SEC, where Ty Simpson comes from. I think this is, if there's a trade up spot, I think it would be here, just to assure for the Cardinals to assure themselves that they're getting ahead of Cleveland, who picks next.
Yeah, I think Arizona is definitely the team for Ty Simpson. They're probably going to have to trade up. I honestly think they might have to get ahead of Pittsburgh at 21. And the interesting thing to me about Ty Simpson's profile is, if you're going to select him, if you're Arizona, they're probably going to start Jacoby Brissett in 2026, right? Does that make sense when you have an older quarterback prospect whose main flaw is experience, right? Like, that's kind of a dichotomy with the Ty Simpson debate that I think gets lost is, you need him to get more reps because he hasn't gotten that many, but you also don't want to start him in year 1 too. So that's kind of like the conversation that I think is most interesting. If I'm Arizona, I'm just waiting until 2027. There's so many quarterbacks in that draft. I know we say it all the time, but I mean, if Arch Manning declared in this draft, he would have been maybe the first overall pick. If Lenore Sellers declared in this draft, he would have been second overall. Dante Moore would have been second overall. And those were all draft eligible players. So I think it's a genuine thing that the quarterback class is going to be better in 2027. So if I'm Arizona, I'm waiting, but unfortunately, you never really know where your pick is going to slot. But I do think the Cardinals are going to end up in the top 5 of 2027. Just looking at their roster, it's not the prettiest sight in the world. But I'm back up with Cleveland at 24th overall. With the 6th overall pick, we took Carnell Tate. And a lot of the reasoning was because I think I'd be comfortable with the tackles at the 24th overall pick versus the receivers. And, in this case, Caleb Lomu is there, and I think he projects to be a starting caliber left tackle. Maybe not quite the ceiling of some other guys in this draft class, like Monroe Freeling, like Spencer Fano, like Francis Maui Noah, but I think he projects to be a solid starter, and Cleveland has a glaring hole on their left side in particular.
They're it's so funny. They came into the season with 5 or they left the season with 5 free agents at all of their starting goal line positions. They traded with, your favorite GM, shout out the former two-point conversion, Nick Caserio. Yeah, that's, a bit we have there. They traded for Titus Howard, and then I think he was extended last offseason, so he has the contract there to be the right tackle for Cleveland, but they need a left tackle among other offensive line spots. I think at this point, Lomo's the safest left tackle. I'm a bit higher on him than consensus. I think he can be a day one starter, maybe a bit limited. Like you said, he's not Caden Proctor's size, right? Or he doesn't have Monroe Freeling's movement ability. But I think he was really solid for Utah this year. And I think he can step in day one and provide some level of stability while they try to figure the rest of it out.
All right, let's get to pick number 25. You had Tremad McCoy slotting in to the Bears pick here.
So the Bears secondary had a ton of interceptions last year, right? I think they were first in the league. They had 3 or 4 players with 4 or more interceptions, but some of those guys are gone. The safeties are gone, really. And I think that they're also looking to upgrade the corners as well. Jermon McCoy, while the red flags might be there for the medicals, if you look back to 2024, that tape is incredible. He was consistently shutting down SEC receivers. He went toe to toe with Jeremiah Smith in their playoff game. Granted, Smith was a freshman, but McCoy was a sophomore too. He wasn't a fully developed player, and I think he fits the mold of size, length. I think his arms are an inch and a half longer than Mansour Delane's. Just really good player. You would just want for him to be healthy, and I think in this class, again, when you get to this point, there are going to be questions with every type of player, and you're just going to have to not deal with it, but grin and bear it when you're looking at a prospect of this potential, especially this late in the first round.
So, 26th overall, Brandon Bean just feels like the type of guy who would take TJ Parker in the first round, right? Edge setting guy. There might be a little bit more pass rushing juice than he showed in 2025 in particular. And I think the Bills are going to be in the market for one of these types of players, whether it's Malachi Lawrence, whether it's TJ Parker, whether it's Zion Young, like you mentioned, maybe a Cassius Howell. I just think that they're going to end up with one of those borderline day one, day two types of edge rushers. And I think TJ Parker fits the bill.
And of those guys, I think it would be someone like Parker, right? I don't think it would be like an R. Mason Thomas or a Cassius Howell because the size, right? Brandon Bean's a big traits size guy, especially with his first rounders. You look at like Greg Rousseau, Dalton Kincaid, Kyer Elam. While it didn't work out, was a bigger corner. Max Harriston's really the only minus size guy, and he's still long enough. He's just really, really thin. So I think if you're looking at the edge rushers that are left in this spot, Parker makes the most sense. And even though they brought in Bradley Chubb, that shouldn't discourage you from adding an upside edge rusher, especially at this point in Bradley Chubb's career, when what he's going to be able to give you is going to be limited, I would imagine. The next pick I had at pick 27, the San Francisco 49ers, despite all the injuries, made it this far. I'm giving them offensive line help with Max Hianachor from Arizona State, someone you are much higher on compared to me. I think he can be a day one right tackle starter. A little bit late to football, but already in the limited time as a starter at Arizona State, 0 sacks allowed over the last 2 years. Really, really good player. Colton McKivitz is their current right tackle, and I think you want to develop someone for the future. Maybe if you're watching live, Dylan's just shaking his head. Maybe he can be the future of the left tackle spot as well if you can develop him, because Trent Williams did get his extension, I think, yesterday. But after next season, it's hard for me to envision Trent Williams, if he's not playing anymore, or if he is playing anymore, he's not going to be the level that he is right now. So I think that getting somebody who can be a long-term player, or it could be an immediate starter at the right tackle spot, is pretty good value this late in the first round.
I'm begging Kyle Shanahan to invest in the offensive line. It's it's bad. They haven't done it in so long. Last year, they invested very heavily into their defensive line, Michael Williams and Alfred Collins, CJ West, and a bunch of other defensive players that they added to that core. But they need to upgrade the talent on the offensive line. Colton McKivitz is not a good player. You could potentially move him inside to like right guard or something. I don't know who there is. It Dom Pooney, their current right guard, or is he on the left
I
side?
I think he's on the right side. I'll look though.
But I just think you have to invest at the tackle position, whether it's for a long term left tackle or an immediate upgrade on the right side. Like it's been time. They've needed to do this for years now, and they've just kind of neglected it because Kyle Shanahan is so good at making the most of, and we'll just call it a less talented offensive line group. But Ihenachor, I think, is somebody who is going to continue to grow and I think has maybe the highest ceiling of any offensive tackle in this draft class. I feel like I've said that 3 times about 3 different players today, but like he only started playing football 5 years ago at JUCO level. Like that's just not to get a player that's as talented as I think it's just somebody who is going to continue to grow and get better and better. But the next pick is another offensive lineman, and it's Nick Casario's team, the Houston Texans. I have them taking Chase Bisontis, the Texas A&M interior offensive lineman. I think if you want a plug-and-play starter, there's a few options on the interior towards the end of the first round, whether it's Kalen Rutledge out of Georgia Tech, whether it's Bisontis out of Texas A&M. Emmanuel Pregnon is a guy who I think teams really like. So in this case, I'm going to go Bisontis. I think he's just going to be a plug and play interior player for a team that made some interesting offensive line moves, to say the least. They traded probably their best offensive lineman in Titus Howard. They made some moves at tackle that are okay, but they still need to beef up the interior.
CJ Stroud needs help. I think we all saw it during the playoff run. Even in the games they won, he looked awful. And some of it was on him. I think he's gotten worse over the course of his career at handling pressure and things like that. But a lot of it was on that offensive line. They were getting clobbered by who was it? It was the Patriots and the Steelers, right? In the other game, they were just getting destroyed. So anytime you can help your quarterback, especially in a year where I think is pivotal for Stroud, like to go forward, is he going to be the guy? Hopefully for him to have a bounce back this year, you need to invest in front of him. And I think the rest of the offense is fine. Maybe running back could be, well, they traded for David Montgomery, but they've done a good job getting receivers in the building. Now you just need to put the line in front of him so he can throw to him. It's like, it's the meme, right? Burrow and Sewell throwing, or Burrow and any offensive lineman and Jamar Chase. It's that meme. So hopefully they can get somebody in there. And I think at this point, Bisontis is one of the few options you can go with. At 29, the Chiefs pick again. I got to do both Chiefs picks, and I thought about doing a trade for him. This comes to them from the Rams pick for Trent McDuffie. And I thought about adding a corner here, but Dylan Thieneman was still on the board. And I think the value, especially at pick 29, which you can probably subtract 10 from, and that's his floor in the draft on Thursday. Thieneman should not, or adding Alohi Gilman should not deter them from adding a guy like Dylan Thieneman, who could play strong safety, who is very, very rangy, and who's a huge plus athlete for the position. I know some people have talked about that some teams view Thieneman as safety one in this class, and I think that's a little bit ridiculous until you remember that Thieneman, much better athlete than Caleb Downs is at the position. So I think he can help revamp that secondary. I know they need corners, but I didn't feel super good about Colton Hood, Chris Johnson, or Avion Terrell at this point in the draft. I think Thieneman's the guy there if he's on the board, which I don't think he will be.
We have 3 pretty unrealistic trades in this mock draft, and I still think Thieneman available at 29 is probably the most unrealistic part. of this entire draft. Very, very good safety. I think Kansas City runs this pick in if he's actually available, which again, he won't be, but super talented. They love having a versatile safety option to invest in, whether it's Tyrann Mathieu or whether it's Justin Reed or just somebody that they can kind of move around the back end. They love having pieces like that. So I think this would be an A plus for Kansas City. So number 30 overall, it's another trench player for the Miami Dolphins. I think you had them selecting Keldrick Falk with the 11th pick. For 30, I had them going with Blake Miller. They still need to invest in the offensive line. They have Austin Jackson projected to start at right tackle. That ship, I think, has long sailed. And I think Blake Miller is going to be a solid starter for a long time in the NFL. We've talked a lot about high potential, high ceiling offensive tackles so far. I don't think Blake Miller has the same ceiling as a guy like Monroe Freeling or Spencer Fano or Francis Maui Noah. But I think he's got a really solid floor. I think he started nearly 60 games at Clemson as a right tackle, which is incredibly impressive. He's very consistent, and he's doing so for a team that hasn't really produced a ton of offensive line talent in the past. So Miami, they add an edge rusher that can continue to grow. They add a solid, stalwart right tackle.
It's interesting how many right tackles are at the top of this year's class, right? Malinoa, Fano, Hiana Chor, and Miller. I think all of them can start pretty early in their careers. At 31, I have the New England Patriots, the Super Bowl runners up, and I'm not sure what the direction is for this team. I know what the direction is post June 1st. We know what's going to happen then. So I didn't want to give them a receiver right away. So I went with somebody who's still pretty high on my board who fell to this point, the Toledo safety, Emmanuel McNeil Warren. I think he plays a lot like Trayvon Merrick, the Panthers star safety. And I think that for a team like New England, that their defense held their own for a good portion of the Super Bowl, but eventually broke down. Darnold was able to get some stuff going. And I think the main thing was that coming downhill, their second and third level players weren't able to fit the run on certain plays. That's why Kenneth Walker won Super Bowl MVP. A guy like McNeil Warren that can play in the box or rotate down from the high position to come hit the ball carrier, hit the receiver is something that I think this defense needs. And I think it's a good finishing touch for a team that's picking this late in the draft.
Speaking of teams picking late, I think Seattle's going to trade out. That might be like the worst kept secret in the entire NFL draft. They currently only have 4 total draft picks. I'm going to have the Las Vegas Raiders moving from 36 to 32. They're going to give up 117, which is a mid 4th round pick. And I think they're going to do so for KC Concepcion, who falls to 32 in this scenario. I think he's in play for Carolina. I think he could go much earlier than that, potentially maybe the Rams at 13. But Concepcion adds a dynamic element to a Vegas Raiders team that's the receiving core is empty there, right? They don't have all that much. They have Trey Tucker. They have Jalen Naylor, who they signed. They traded away Devontae Adams a few years ago. They traded away Jacoby Myers midway through this past season. So they need to add some more receiving talent, especially for a quarterback who's going to step onto an NFL field for the first time and Fernando Mendoza and have to be a week 1 starter. So Concepcion to me is very similar to Rashid Shaheed in Seattle, at least kind of similar skill sets, although I think Casey Concepcion is a much higher ceiling as a receiver than what Shaheed is. And, obviously you have a head coach coming from that Seattle offense as well. So this just makes a ton of sense to me. And for Seattle, you can move back 4 spots, still probably get your guy. Maybe that's Chris Johnson, the San Diego State corner, while also collecting another pick.
Return value too, right? He was a kick and punt returner, and Shaheed, one of the best in the game there. So I'm sure Clint Kubiak would be pleased with that one. The Raiders' number 1 receiver is a tight end right now, right? With Brock Bowers. So any explosive receiving element that you could add for Mendoza, I think would be a welcome pick for Las Vegas.
Okay, we're going to do a quick recap on all 32 picks, and then we will have our Panthers specific mock drafts right after that. So 1 through 4, we had the Las Vegas Raiders selecting Fernando Mendoza. the New York Jets taking David Bailey. We had the Arizona Cardinals selecting Francis Mauigoa. We had the Cowboys trading up to number 4 to select Arvell Reese. We had the New York Giants taking Sonny Styles, the Browns taking Carnell Tate, the Commanders taking Jeremiah Love, and the New Orleans Saints taking Jordan Tyson. 9 through 12, we had Kansas City taking Ruben Bain, the Giants with their second pick taking Caleb Downs, Miami taking Keldrick Falk, Tennessee via Dallas, that trade up we just mentioned, taking Micaiah Lemon. We had the Los Angeles Rams taking Spencer Fano. We had Baltimore taking Venga Ione. We had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking Akeem Mesidor. We had the Jets taking Denzel Boston. We had the Detroit Lions taking Caden Proctor. We had the Minnesota Vikings taking Mansour Delane. The Carolina Panthers, your Carolina Panthers, taking Monroe Freeling. We had the Titans with that second pick from Dallas taking Malachi Lawrence. We had the Steelers at 21 taking Omar Cooper. We had the LA Chargers taking Kenyon Sadiq. We had the Cardinals trading from 34 to 23 to take Ty Simpson. We had the Browns with their second pick taking Caleb Lomu. We had the Bears taking Jermod McCoy, who fell to 25. We had at 26 Buffalo taking TJ Parker. We had the 49ers taking Max Ihenachor. We had the Texans at 28 taking Chase Bizontis. We had at 29 Kansas City taking Dylan Thieneman, who I think we agree will not be available. We had at 30 Miami with their second pick taking Blake Miller. We had at 31 the Patriots taking Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. And at 32, we had the Vegas Raiders trading up, giving up a 4th round pick to take Casey Concepcion to round out the first round. So with that, we're going to get to your Panthers specific mock draft first, Jacob. And we did 7 picks for each of us. And we'll start with your first pick, who happens to be the same pick that we talked about in the 32 team mock draft.
It's funny how that works, right? No, I'm just playing. Monroe Freeling, I think, is my number 1 target for Carolina. For this mock draft, I tried to do players that have been linked to Carolina over the process. I think out of all of my picks here, Freeling is the only one that hasn't had an overt visit or has been listed as visited the team. But I think he makes too much sense if he's on the board here at 19. Carolina needs long-term answers at both tackle spots, to be quite frank. If Aquanu isn't back early this season, Taylor Moton's getting up there in age. The offensive line's already too expensive. You can do a lot of stuff to move off of players. I think it makes a ton of sense. If you're going to add a left tackle or a tackle in general, you need to do it early. Tackles that are added later in the draft tend to not pan out. And I think that we've seen Freeling's rise throughout the process go from somewhere maybe in the 30s on some people's boards up to pick 6 maybe with the Cleveland Browns. I always thought that was a little bit rich. I think he's going to go more from, let's say, like the 13 to 20 range compared to the 5 to 15 range. And that's the perfect, or Carolina falls perfectly in that spot at 19. Do you want me to just run through these and then we can?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can talk about them all at the end.
So at 51, I have AJ Halsey, a safety from LSU. One of the only defensive back 30 visits that Carolina's had. And I think that if they are going to pass, or if Dylan Thieneman might not even be there, someone who they've been connected to, I think Halsey fits in well with Trayvon Merrick. Halsey's pretty rangy, pretty good hitter as well. At 83, this is one that I didn't initially watch in my film breakdown. I had to go back and watch. Dejon Stribling, a wide receiver from Ole Miss. He's been a very late riser throughout the process. He had, I think, multiple Zoom meetings with Carolina. 5th-year senior from Ole Miss. He's had experience at Washington State with Cam Ward and at Oklahoma State. And he's a big blocking type receiver with speed after the catch. I think he kind of fills the Xavier Legette role if this is the pick. And I know that'd be pretty early to give up on Legette, but I think Dave Canales likes his larger receivers. Canales and Edzik both have wide receiver backgrounds, and they certainly have a type so far in the 3 years that Carolina has had them here. 119, I had Jake Slaughter at center. I think he's the best center in this class. Him and Sam Hecht, the Kansas State guy, really good movement center. And I think he's going to be able to handle pass pro better than guys like Austin Corbett and Kay Mays have in the past, just due to his mobility. I don't know if you would start right away given the Luke Fortner signing, but it's good enough depth regardless at a position where you need depth. That's a spot where Carolina has been tested over the past couple years. At 158, I had Caleb Elarmzor, who's a linebacker from TCU. Carolina met with him at the combine, played at Cal, then at TCU. I think he's pretty good in pursuit and is a big hitter at the linebacker spot. That's somebody that can be a rotation player, maybe on run heavy downs because the Panthers added Devin Lloyd, already have Trevin Wallace. I think that'd be another athletic linebacker in that group. At 159, I think this is the pick that Carolina got from the Adam Thielen trade from Minnesota. So consecutive picks here. I think this is the 5th round. I had Nick Barrett from South Carolina. He had a local visit. I think he would continue the South Carolina trend. I think Carolina on defense needs 3 things: a starting safety, a slot corner, and more defensive line depth. With Ashawn Robinson being a cap casualty in this offseason, I think Barrett can be a good part of that rotation, take some of the pressure off of guys like Turk Wharton, like Bobby Brown. And then the final pick 200, I had Jack Strand, who is a QB from Minnesota Moorhead, I think Division II. He had a 30 visit with Carolina, and Carolina had 4 30 visits with QBs, with Haynes King from Georgia Tech, Baron Morton from Texas Tech, Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt. All 3 of those guys, well, Haynes King doesn't super underwhelm me. Baron Morton and Pavia, I don't think are good prospects whatsoever. And then Jack Strand, who it was a late 30 visit because he just got his 30-day, I think it was at Minnesota, or I don't know whose pro day it was, but he had his 30-day late because Minnesota Moorhead doesn't have a pro day because they're a smaller school. Throughout his college career, he has thrown for across 4 years 13,155 yards and 126 TDs, in 42 games. So that could be 3 seasons if they reach the playoffs there at his school. I think he's a good long-term developmental backup, and it seems like given the 4 30 visits to QBs, that's a direction Carolina wants to head in. I would much rather take a swing on a guy like this, who smaller school, 6'3", a lot larger than guys like Diego Pavia and Baron Morton. I would much rather take a swing on this than some of the other QBs that Carolina has brought in.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I haven't grinded the Jack Strand tape
The
at
Minnesota
all.
Moorhead tape. It's
No,
few and far between.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I think I heard that he had posted his film on YouTube himself because it's like hard to come by Minnesota Moorhead tape, obviously. Yeah, I like the Freeling pick. Halsey, I could definitely see on day 2, especially if Panthers, if they pass on a guy like Dylan Thieneman in the first round. I think that safeties potentially something that they're looking to address early. So Halsey, I think, being the versatile piece that he is, could potentially be that back end type of player for Carolina. I like him. Stribling is an interesting receiver prospect to me. What do you make of kind of we talk about Tennessee receivers all the time. To me, Mississippi is kind of the same way, where it's a
Yeah.
very specific scheme. There's not much variety in the types of routes that receivers are running, but Stribling is so unique with what he offers in terms of that speed, in terms of that after catch ability, that it might not matter as much, but I do worry a little bit about the route stuff with him because players coming from such unique college offenses just struggle to, I think, initially catch up at rookie minicamp. And there's a little bit more of a learning curve for those types of players.
For people getting Jonathan Mingo flashbacks because the larger, fast Ole Miss receivers, I get that completely. But I think Stribling offers actual football stuff, like being able to block as a receiver, actually having good. This sounds very weird, but like good movement ability for a receiver. Like he knows how to place his feet. He doesn't waste movement, which was one of Mingo's biggest flaws in his route
And
running.
Leggett.
Leggett as well. But I still think Leggett will have a role this year. But it was so evident with Mingo immediately, right? That even after the catch, he would take extra steps to slow himself down to make a cut. or something like that. I don't think you're going to see that with Stribling if he's the pick. And he's had a ton of visits over like 30 days in pro days and stuff. That's over. But over the last month or so, he's had a ton of Zooms, a ton of visits with teams. So I think he's a good candidate to be a late riser.
Yeah, I think that if they took him at 83, you'd probably want him to be that wide receiver three, right? Just somebody
Mhm.
that can stretch the field. Maybe you design some underneath stuff for him, almost as sort of a runway type of guy who can give you something after the catch. So he's an interesting guy to me, but I am just wary of receivers that come from certain college schemes because of that route diversity being so underdeveloped. I'll say Slaughter at 119 is good. I think he'd immediately compete to be the Panthers' starting center. I think that he's a good interior offensive lineman. I have a different center in my mock draft, so I'm interested to get your thoughts on him. As for the other three, I like the quarterback. I almost wonder if they wait on quarterback just to get whoever's left in undrafted free agency, right? Just because I'm not sure that any of those players that you mentioned specifically are going to be worth taking in round 6 specifically. Maybe they acquire more picks, something in like the 230s range, and just take a guy there. Maybe it's just at 200, but of the four that you mentioned, Strand is most interesting to me because he's the most unknown commodity of them. Um, but yeah, I think that it's a good mock. I'm going to give you a grade. I think that this is going to be a B minus. I think I'm just lower on Halsey and Stribling than you are, but I do love the Monroe Freeling pick. He's maybe my second favorite target for the Panthers, and I think you did a good job here with this mock.
I'll take it. I think Freeling and Halsey can start. And for the rest of the guys, like I said, I tried to add guys that have had connections to the Panthers because over Dan Morgan's 2 full drafts as the lead guy, a lot of players that Carolina's either met with at all-star games or has brought into the facility. And that's everyone here except for Freeling, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and they've been kind of working through tackles on the pro day circuit as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that they have experience with him, um, however it may be. So moving on, my mock draft, I had 19 the Carolina Panthers selecting Casey Concepcion. Um, He's my favorite target for the Panthers at 19. I think he's an electric player, shifty, should immediately become the team's number 2 pass catcher. And he offers things that the Panthers don't have in the offense already, whether it's an over the deep, over the field stretching kind of guy, whether it's somebody who can make something happen after the catch, having a true man beater. He's a YZ receiver that can beat man coverage consistently, and you do worry about the drops with him, but I just have to assume that it's going to get better in the NFL with NFL level coaching, with receiving former receivers at the head coach and offensive coordinator positions. I just trust them to get the most out of what Casey Concepcion can be. And he's my number 2 receiver in this draft class, only behind Carnell Tate. I think he's a rare receiving talent, more rare than guys like Makai Lemon in this draft class, where it's just the dynamic ability that Concepcion has would be unique to this Panthers offense and something that I think would help them score more consistent points offensively. So after that, 51, I have Anthony Hill, linebacker from Texas. Anthony Hill is a Dan Morgan type of linebacker. He's long, he's a playmaker, and he affects the game in a variety of ways. He's a little bit raw, a little bit underdeveloped. I think that you kind of see him maybe miss his assignment a lot of times as a linebacker, which can be frustrating. But the variety of what he gives you at the position is, I think, among the best in this class. He's super athletic, really good blitzer. I think he has the athleticism to line up against running backs or tight ends in coverage, but also hopefully you'll see that run feeding kind of develop as time goes by. And we talk about thresholds for Dan Morgan and the Panthers specifically, and they like these longer, more athletic linebackers. So they signed Devin Lloyd. They drafted Trevin Wallace. I think adding Anthony Hill to that group would complete that linebacking room. So I have him at 51. At 83, I have Oscar Delp, who's been pretty heavily linked to the Carolina Panthers. He had a visit with them about a week ago. I think he would be the most athletic and explosive player in the tight end room immediately. I think that they need somebody that can be a reliable pass catcher. And Oscar Delp, I think, would be an immediate upgrade over a guy like JT Sanders, who saw a lot of the field when he's been healthy so far throughout his career, but he just hasn't really cut it. A lot of drops, a lot of really frustrating moments from him. I think that they're going to be committed to finding a tight end on day 2 of the draft. So after that, I have Travis Burke, a tackle out of Memphis, kind of a more developmental guy with the, Rasheed Walker addition. They don't have to attack tackle as early as maybe what we expected for a short amount of time, but he's a bigger guy. He doesn't move super well, but he is a people pusher. I think that he's going to be good in sort of a power scheme, one that Dave Canales and Brad Idzik presumably like to run. And he'll be a swing tackle in year 1, maybe a spot starter. A lot of people like him maybe at the back half of the 3rd round. But you can evaluate him from there. He's somebody where, if you don't want to take a tackle in round 1 or the value doesn't line up in rounds 2 or 3, I think Burke could provide a solid developmental option that'll continue to get better throughout his rookie contract. So after that, I have Trey Zune, who he played left tackle at Texas A&M, but a lot of teams and I think media members project him to be a center. He can go anywhere from round 3 to round 5. Big, tall guy. I think he's 6'6", around like 315. Solid anchor, good instincts. He's kind of stubby. He doesn't have the longest arms in the world, but I think he's got a really high floor and could compete for the starting center job. Sicario Davis. Dave Canales and Dan Morgan come from the Seattle Seahawks school of drafting long and fast corners. That's basically all that Sicario Davis is. He's 6'4", 33-inch arms, and ran a 4.41 40-yard dash. He's raw. He needs to be sticky in coverage. But I think if you want a player that's going to be available on day 3, develop at his position while also providing special teams value, Sicario Davis is about as good as it gets, especially in the 5th round. And at 200 overall, I'm still kind of the mindset that even with Casey Concepcion, the Panthers still need some more explosion, whether it's on offense, whether it's on special teams. So I have them selecting Navy, we'll just call it playmaker, Eli Heidenreich. The Panthers were just dreadful on kickoff and punt returns last year. And I think while adding Casey Concepcion helps, adding Eli Heidenreich in theory would turn, those units from really severe weaknesses into potential really big strengths. He didn't do returns in college, but he played a role that I think you could project him being a returner more so than some other playmakers. Really weird position. I don't even know how to describe it unless you've seen Navy play football, but let's just call him a running back wide receiver combination. He projects really well to a special teams, maybe a manufactured target guy. Given his 40 time, he's lightweight, and he ran a 100th percentile 3-cone drill. I think it was a 6.55 3-cone. So it's all in on juice between Concepcion, between Delp, between Heidenreich. I think that you can add playmakers throughout. It's something the Panthers offense just desperately needs.
I like this a lot. I'm comparing our drafts, and it's funny how different they are. Like you
I
go,
think the biggest critique, I'll go ahead and say it. I think there's no defensive back is probably unrealistic here.
we have Tacario Davis, right?
Yeah, I guess slot corner safety, I should say.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was thinking like I had safety, tackle, and what was my 3rd pick? It was receiver, right? And you had
Yeah.
receiver, linebacker, tight end. It's just interesting how different those are, but I really like a lot of this. Casey Concepcion, you mentioned, is your top prospect player for Carolina at 19. I think he's number 2 for me, number 2 or 3. I think he brings the juice like you're talking about. Carolina doesn't have a player like this, and even though the drops should make you worry, I think you can fix that. I also think he had some untapped potential at Texas A&M. there was a tweet that came out a couple of days ago. It was about missed target rate on deep passes, and Casey Concepcion's was almost 50%. Like it was rough watching, and I'll talk about Trey Zune to say it was rough watching Texas A&M offensive tape this during this cycle. Anthony Hill, we talked about this a couple weeks ago that I think he fits the Dan Morgan mold much more than a guy like CJ Allen or Jacob Rodriguez would. Just larger, longer, more versatile than those players as well. And he was at that. Dan Morgan himself was at that pro day as well. Oscar Delp, you know how much I like Oscar Delp. Immediate plus blocker at the position, immediate high upside receiver. Really not underwhelming, but the Georgia offense didn't fit him because their quarterback can't really throw two tight ends in that one. So it's kind of tough to evaluate, but I think he has potential there. Travis Burke is someone that I watched later, and I think he is more of a developmental player. But because of Rasheed Walker, I guess you don't have to have more of a bona fide starter early in the duration of his rookie contract. So I'm all for having developmental O linemen, and I think that's what Trey Zune can be. Didn't love him at left tackle, going back to that Texas A&M tape, but a lot of their issues also stem back to Marcel Reed, the quarterback, and a lot of the
He just
pressures that Zune
bails
gave
from
up.
the back.
Yeah, their offense was like three things, and one of them was Reed just scrambles to the left, which is Trey Zune's zone, and then he just runs and gets like a 6-yard gain. But I do like moving him inside. It's always hard for me to see tackle to center because I don't know if they've done stuff like that before, but I think he has the movement capability to be able to like not only get the snap off but move after the snap. That was Austin Corbett had a real problem with that the past couple of years. He would be stepping on Bryce Young's foot a lot, and it was nobody else. It was just him. So having somebody that can move, I think, would be a plus there. Takario Davis, I actually liked him a bit more at Arizona before he went to Washington, but he does fit the Pete Carroll large corner mold, and that's where both Canales and Dan Morgan come from, like you mentioned. And before you ask, I have seen the Eli Heidenreich and Christian McCaffrey combine comparison. I have seen it. Maybe he could be this year's Christian McCaffrey, this Panthers team's Christian McCaffrey. But when you talk about him not having return experience, if you play running back for one of the service academies, it's basically returning because you're
Yeah.
getting 11 guys. They're not throwing the ball. You're getting 11 defenders chasing after you, and it's a simulated kick return. And he does a good job of at avoiding tackles and creating yaks. So I think going all in on the explosive upside of players is a pretty good direction you've gone in here. I think I'm going to go. I'm going to go B as well, just because I don't love the trench investment in this one. Ideally, you'd like to get a tackle a bit earlier, but you're not going to be able to get a KC Concepcion on day 2 or day 3. And so I think if we want to fill the void of Carolina's offense not having an explosive playmaker, you really are going to have to do it on day 1. And I like the Concepcion pick.
I think we're almost in lockstep with a lot of the players that we prefer for the Panthers. Like we like Concepcion, we like Monroe Freeling. I mean, we can just go ahead and show the graphic of what kind of players that each of us kind of like with that 19th, or we'll just say first round pick to protect us if there's any trades, whether it's up or down the board. But yeah, we like a lot of the tackles, we like a lot of the receivers. We're both pretty high on Thieneman, I'd say, and then from there it kind of frays. But I think if you look across the board at Sports CLT, there's a lot of us that are just higher on those tackles and those receivers. And I think we value getting one of those types of players at 19 or in the first round over a safety or over a corner or a defensive lineman who I don't know who they'd take if it was a defensive lineman. Maybe it's who we talked about last week in Caden McDonald, but yeah, it's rough. I'm not sure who it would be, but yeah, I think that we're pretty aligned on what we think the Panthers probably should do in the first round.
Yeah, if it's not Concepcion or the splashy receiver, I think they should do the responsible thing and go tackle. But I can't get this itch out of the back of my head that over the past weekend or so, Dylan Thieneman's been linked a lot to Carolina. and he might not even be there. He might be
Yeah.
the Harrison Smith replacement. He might go much earlier than that, maybe to the Giants, like you alluded to earlier. But he would be the finishing piece to a defense that had a lot of reworking in free agency. So if he's there, I think Dan Morgan and Dave Canales and the whole brain trust are going to think a long time about adding a safety to really complete that defense outside of maybe a slot corner.
So the final thing we'll do here is that I just want to get your opinion on, let's just say, the four most likely options. Whether you can include trades, whether it's trading up or trading down, and whatever players you think are the most likely. You can assign percentages if you want, but I'll leave that up to you.
Ooh, most likely. Well, I'm going to say Concepcion's up there. He's been mentioned by beat writers. He's local. Carolina likes local players. I think Thienemann's up there. Just all the stuff over the weekend has me Thienemann to Carolina pilled. I think Omar Cooper Jr. is up there as well. He had a 30 with the team. He brings an element of yards after the catch that the team doesn't have. And I really don't think Sadiq is up there as much as outside outlets have mocked him to
Yeah,
Carolina.
I
I
agree.
think they don't really understand Carolina's tendencies, and I can't see that being the pick. So I would say, what did I say? Concepcion, Thienemann, Cooper, and I can't see. I would say Jordan Tyson if he's there. Um, Maybe Blake Miller because I don't know if Freeling's going to be there, and I know that Panthers offensive line coach Joe Gilbert was at that Clemson Pro Day, and he was working Blake Miller for about 2.5 hours at the left tackle spot as well. He did both left and right drills for that. So I'll go Blake Miller, Casey Concepcion, Thienemann, and Omar Cooper. And if I had to give a percentage, I'd say Concepcion's probably the favorite out of that group, and then Cooper probably number two.
Yeah, I don't feel good about giving any single player more than like a 20% chance at being this pick. Just because you're so far down the draft order that it's hard to have that much confidence in anything happening. I'd say above all else, I think a trade is more likely than any single
Absolutely.
option, right? Like this is we talked about it last week where Dan Morgan, the only top 100 pick he's ever made that wasn't as a result of a trade was Tedero McMillan in the top 10. And teams just operate differently when they have a
And
premium draft pick like that.
and if you pay attention to the Panthers blueprint, he almost made that trade to the Rams.
Almost,
They were
yeah.
close.
It very well could have happened, and we would have had the 29th pick as well this year. So I think I'm glad he didn't make that trade. But I would say that like if I had to put a percentage on a trade, I'd say like over 35% if I had to really put a number on it. And I would say that's almost exclusively in a trade down. I just cannot see them giving up assets in a trade up for a single player, especially if it's somebody that's not at a premium position. Um, I'll say that after that, I think that Thienemann's probably the most likely option, maybe like 15% chance, something like that. Maybe Concepcion after that, Omar Cooper after that, and then you could just fill in whatever trench player and maybe Sadiq filling in the remainder of that 100%. I just think that a trade is probably the most likely option, even if it's not like an odds on favorite thing of happening.
One player that I'll mention that both of us didn't mention before we get out of here, we talked about him as the 16th pick in this draft, Denzel Boston, late 30 with the Panthers, and the Panthers do have a type there at larger receiver. And I wouldn't be a fan at 19, but if it's a trade down scenario where Carolina maybe trades out of the first or has a pick like 29 or later, it wouldn't surprise me to see them go after Boston because they did their work on him.
He does not have the juice.
No, he doesn't.
And I think that's kind of the main need. If you take a receiver, you need the juice. And I would grade that one pretty harshly, honestly, if it were up to me. But
How do
um,
you feel about a trade in general? Like prior to, let's say we're sitting here, this would be around the time Carolina would pick, I would assume, and they come on the clock and just say that Carolina moved down to 26 and got a fourth for it. Would that be like a positive reception even before knowing who the pick is?
It depends. I think like if they're moving down, there's probably, the top players are all gone on the board, right?
Right.
Um, I would say that, moving to like that, let's say late 20s range for a fourth is probably a little bit too little for me. Like if you're going to take a fourth, it has to be 23 or sooner, I think, right? From Philly, potentially. Maybe they move up for a tackle, but I think if you're going to move after that, you probably need a third round pick. It also depends. Like if you're going to get Casey Concepcion anyway, depending on where you trade back to, it might not matter whatever the return is as long as you're gaining assets in return.
I like it.
So with that, we're going to get out of here. But first, we're going to plug the draft show that we're doing on Thursday. So we will be live at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're going to be live throughout the entirety of the first round. We're going to have on some very special guests as well. Some big names. We're going to have Matthew Sponauer. We're going to have Walker Mail from WFNZ. We're going to have Jared Feinberg. We're going to have Chase Pletcher, and we're going to have JP Barry of Fox Sports Spartanburg. So please tune in to that. It's going to be amazing. The guests will be kind of scattered throughout the show. We'll only have one on at a time. And then producer Pete is going to be joining us as well. He's going to kind of run the board for us. And we'll be here all night. I'm very, very excited to hear this noise. We'll hear it 32 times throughout the night. So I hope you're ready for that. We're going to play some draft bingo as well. So I hope you have a printer ready to get your bingo board ready. Thieneman's going to take out like half the board whenever he's picked through whoever provides analysis of him. But it's going to be a good time. We're going to be live all night and react to all things Panthers and all things draft. Jacob, do you have anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Can I re-roll my bingo board until I get a line of Thieneman type quotes?
It's got to be first spin.
First spin. Got it.
And you can find that bingo board on the Sports CLT draft guide. That link is at sportsclt.com. It should be in the navigation bar. If you have not checked it out already, please do. There's a ton of information in there. But we'll be back on Thursday live reacting to all things draft. Hopefully we get some interesting moments like Michael Penix, that pick, and Cleveland Farrell and some early surprises, but we'll see. I'm not expecting much. Maybe the Cardinals will just take Ty Simpson at number 3 potentially, but we're going to get out of here. Jacob, you have Dylan Thieneman breakdown dropping tomorrow at, I think I scheduled it for 9 a.m. Eastern. So there's that. And we'll have a lot of rumors on the Sports CLT Panthers draft rumor tracker as well. So Jacob,